No one came to the CEO's paralyzed daughter's birthday until a single dad said, "Can we join you?" The wind slammed the cafe door so hard the windows rattled, and a cupcake with one stubborn candle skated toward the edge of a lonely table. A girl in a sleek wheelchair stared frozen between saving it and letting it fall. That's when a small boy in a yellow raincoat lunged forward, catching it in both hands like a life preserver. His father followed rain in his hair and smiled as if to say, "Rescues should be asked for, not assumed." Follow my story to the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far it travels. The plate trembled in the boy's hands, the tiny flame still holding its ground against the draft. "May I save your birthday?" the boy asked, his tone more serious than most grown men's. Grace Holloway blinked, caught off guard by both the question and the sincerity. "Yes, please." He eased the plate back toward her, straightened the candle with delicate precision, and glanced at his father for approval. "Good work, Eli," the man said. His voice was warm, but grounded, the kind that made you believe he meant what he said. He turned to Grace and offered his hand. "Ryan Parker, this is my son Eli." Her fingers disappeared into his calloused, steady nothing performative about his grip. "You two make a habit of dramatic entrances?" she asked, a small spark of amusement breaking through her usual reserve. "Only on Tuesdays," Eli replied. "And on days with thunder." Ryan tilted his head toward the rain pelting the glass. "Power might cut. Mind if we share your table until it calms down?" Grace glanced at the nearly empty cafe. "It's your storm," she said, gesturing to the chairs. The place had thinned as the sky darkened. Behind the counter, Marla wiped her hands on a faded apron, watching them with the calm knowing of someone who'd fed half the town in every season. Ryan slid into the seat beside Eli, draping his damp jacket over the back. If he noticed the matte black frame of Grace's chair, he didn't show it. Instead, he pulled a napkin and dabbed away a few drops of water that had landed on the table. "You keeping the candle?" he asked. "It seems stubborn," she said. "Stubborn candles make the best wishes," Eli declared. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You can tell me yours. I don't count." Grace smiled faintly. Then it wouldn't work. He nodded gravely, as if filing the logic away for later. Outside, the wind howled harder. Marla appeared with 3 steaming mugs. "House policy storm coffee's free if you're sitting near the windows. Call it risk pay." Ryan accepted his with a grateful nod. "Generous," practical Marla said. "Keeps people from dashing into traffic." Grace wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the heat collect in her palms. There was comfort in the silence that followed, not heavy, just unhurried. So Ryan said, "What does a person do on a birthday in a storm?" Apparently, Grace said she hires a small rescue team. Eli straightened proudly. "We work for tips. Cake slices only." Grace's mouth curved almost against her will. "Noted. You from here?" she asked Ryan. "Close enough," he said. "Workshop's 15 minutes up the road. We build things, tables, cribs, the occasional boat shelf when I'm showing off." Dad fixed Marla's counter. Eli added. Grace's eyes drifted toward the counter. The corner was seamless, the grain running like a river. "You made that?" Ryan shrugged. "I listened to the wood until it told me what it wanted." "That's a line," she said, surprised at how easily the word slipped out. "It's also true." His eyes held the patience of someone who saw shape inside the rough. Eli leaned forward. Do you have a line? A line. Something you say that makes people go, whoa, and then think about it all day. Grace thought for a long moment. I used to. Don't fight the water, learn how it holds you. Eli's eyebrows shot up. That's good. That's whoa. Swimmer Ryan asked. Was Grace said. She blew out the candle before the storm could. Smoke curled upward like a small private prayer. The wind rattled the door again, and the lights flickered before steadying. Eli lifted his hand. Can we sing? Marla raised a brow. In my cafe, goldfish can sing if they want to. Eli grinned and began his father's baritone, steadying the wobbly melody. It wasn't a performance. It was an offering. Grace let the ache bloom behind her ribs unresisted. When the last note faded, Eli whispered, "Make a second wish. For backup." Greedy, she murmured, but her eyes stung. A man in a soaked baseball cap barged in, barking into his phone. Marla's look sent him to the far table. The world rushed back, cups clattering, espresso hissing, rain arguing with the town. Ryan offered her a fork. Permission to commit cupcake. Grace laughed, a sound even she didn't recognize. Permission granted. They ate and talked in safe circles. Whether local high school teams, the town's love-hate with the sea. Eli explained dinosaur hierarchies. Ryan listened to both of them with the same respect. When Eli finally paused for breath, Grace asked, "Any birthdays you're saving today?" "Someone we love," Ryan said. "Every year we come here and tell a story about her. Traditions," he added, "are how we carry people without dropping them." Grace tucked the thought away before she could stop herself. Outside, a siren wailed, then faded. Marla set 2 sugar cookies shaped like boats on the table. "For navigating," she said. "What if I'm not good at it?" Grace asked quietly. "Then you do what boats do," Marla replied. "Point your bow toward home even if you zigzag." Eli beamed. "Dad says course correction isn't a mistake, it's science." Grace glanced at Ryan. "Your dad has a line for everything. Only the important parts," he said. The wind began to ease, but neither of them moved to leave. Grace didn't notice how much warmer the room felt than when she'd first rolled in. The rain thudded softer against the windows, now no longer hurling itself in sheets but trickling in steady lines. Grace's eyes followed one drop as it wandered down the glass, joining others in crooked paths toward the sill. Eli's gaze stayed on her cupcake. "You didn't tell us your wish," he said, chin propped in his hands. "I told you," she replied, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. "It won't work if I do." "Maybe it already did," Eli said, simply, as if it were a fact as obvious as the mug in front of him. Ryan let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. "He's 6, he said to her. "Thinks he's 80. "I like 80, Eli countered. 80-year-olds say what they mean." Grace's smile wavered, but it stayed. "I like 8, too." The door chimed, letting in another curl of cold air. Someone entered, shaking rain from a sleek black umbrella coat, immaculate despite the weather. He scanned the cafe in a single sweep jaw, set impatience in the crease of his brow. Grace stilled in her chair, her voice flattening. "Something like that," she murmured when Ryan glanced at her. The man didn't see her. He moved on, settling near the front without a second glance. Ryan noticed the shift in her tone but didn't press. Instead, he slid the cupcake plate toward Eli. One more bite for the road, Eli happily obliged. When he was done, he rummaged in the pocket of his raincoat and produced a sticker, a slightly crooked cartoon stegosaurus, and placed it carefully in front of Grace. "For luck," he said. "Luck likes to be told where to go." I'll keep that in mind. She tucked it into her wallet like it mattered. They stood together, Ryan shrugging into his still damp jacket. "We're usually here on Tuesdays," he said, his tone casual, the way you leave a porch light on without announcing it. Grace's hand lingered on the wheel of her chair. Noted. Outside, the storm had thinned to a mist, the street lights casting halos in the damp air. Ryan pushed the door open for Eli, then glanced back. For a heartbeat, Grace met his eyes. There were rooms in that look, some locked, some dusty, but a few windows cracked open. The bell chimed as they left, and the cold poked its head in like a curious neighbor. Grace stayed a moment longer, tracing a fingertip along the repaired corner of the counter. Marla leaned an elbow on the surface. "You going to sit here waiting for the next storm?" she asked gently. "Or are you going to make your own weather?" Grace brushed a crumb from the plate. "Maybe," she said, surprising herself. "Maybe I'll learn to carry an umbrella." "Good start," Marla said. "Umbrellas are just portable courage." Grace turned toward the door, motors humming beneath her. The air outside was washed clean and waiting. She looked back once, her gaze catching the counter's smooth corner again. It felt like a promise a person could keep. The next Tuesday arrived with sun so bright it felt like an apology from the sky. Grace told herself she was just stopping in for coffee, that it was habit, not expectation. But when she rolled through the door, they were there. Ryan in his work shirt with sawdust still clinging to the cuffs, Eli in a hoodie with dinosaurs climbing the sleeves. "You came," Eli said, as though she'd just returned from a long trip. "I needed coffee," she said, though it came out softer than she meant. They told their Tuesday story, one thing they remembered about someone they'd loved. Eli went first, recalling how she, his mother Grace, guessed made pancakes that were always perfect circles. Ryan followed with a memory about a lullaby sung off-key. When they turned to her, Grace hesitated, fingers tightening on her cup. Finally, "My mom said, 'Water doesn't judge the shape of you. It just mirrors how you move.'" Eli grinned. "That's a good one." Ryan's gaze lingered, not with pity but with interest, the kind you didn't have to earn. Marla passed by, topping off their mugs. "Some rooms are built to keep you dry," she said. "Some rooms are built to keep you." The thought settled in Grace's chest as steady as the hum of her chair. She wasn't sure yet which kind of room this was, but she stayed long enough to wonder. The following Tuesday brought rain again, though softer than the storm that had flung them together. Grace lingered outside Harbor Light Cafe, watching the water slide off the awning before rolling in. Ryan and Eli were already there, sharing a plate of pancakes. Eli waved his fork like a flag. "You're late," he announced. Grace smirked. "Didn't realize this was an appointment." "It is now," Ryan said, his voice carrying that easy steadiness she was starting to recognize. Marla appeared with her coffee without asking. "First rule of Tuesdays," she said, "no one leaves without telling a story." Grace arched a brow. "A story about someone you've carried with you," Ryan explained. "Tradition." Eli went first, solemnly declaring, "She thought my middle name should be Brave." He grinned. "Dad said that's like giving me homework forever." Ryan added his own, a tale about a lullaby sung out of tune, but with perfect timing to hush storms. When their eyes turned to her, Grace hesitated. Her thumb rubbed the rim of her mug before she spoke. "My mother. She used to tell me water doesn't judge the shape of you. It just mirrors how you move." Eli's mouth formed a small wow. "That's a keeper," he said. Ryan's gaze held hers for a beat longer than usual, unforced but steady. The conversation drifted toward woodwork. Eli bragged that his dad could fix anything with a grain, and Grace finally asked about the cafe's counter. Ryan smiled faintly. That corner stopped being brave. I just reminded it how. Something about that line made her chest tighten. She wanted to ask what he'd mean if he were talking about people, not counters, but she didn't. Not yet. A flash of motion near the door caught her eye. A man in a tailored coat stepped inside, scanning the room with practiced disinterest. His gaze skipped right over her. Grace stiffened, the warmth of the moment cooling a degree. "Friend of yours?" Ryan asked, his voice low. "Something like that," she replied, and sipped her coffee. The man didn't linger. He ordered something to go impatient in every gesture. When he left, the door chime seemed louder than usual. Marla set down a plate of sugar cookies shaped like boats. "For navigating," she said. "What if I'm not good at it?" Grace asked quietly. Marla gave her a look that was soft but sharp. "Then you point your bow toward home even if you zigzag." Eli nodded sagely. "Course correction. Dad says it's science, not a mistake." Grace smiled, not the polite one she wore in boardrooms, but something closer to real. The lights flickered, then pulling their attention upward. Outside, rain fell in sheets again. Marla muttered something about the breaker and disappeared into the back. When the power snapped off entirely, the cafe gasped in unison. A small circle of light bloomed on their table. Ryan's flashlight upright, its beam turning their cups into little lighthouses. "You okay?" he asked her quietly. She realized he'd asked her that once before, and now she meant it when she answered. "Yeah, I'm okay." Eli leaned into the glow eyes, bright. "Dad says pockets are for preparedness, not crumbs." Grace laughed softly. "That's unreasonably comforting." Ryan grinned. "Comfort should be unreasonable." The power returned with a hum, and the cafe exhaled. But the soft tint of light between them lingered in her mind. When she left that day, the storm still grumbling, Ryan said, "If you ever want to see where corners remember how to be brave, the shop's open." She didn't commit. But as she rolled away, the invitation stayed with her warm against the cold. Saturday afternoon carried the scent of wet cedar through the streets, the kind of day when sawdust clings to your sleeves. Grace told herself she was just passing by Ryan's workshop, but her chair slowed when she saw the big roll-up door open, light spilling onto the sidewalk like a welcome mat. Inside, Eli sat cross-legged on a workbench, tongue between his teeth as he sketched. Ryan was bent over a half-built table, sleeves, rolled hands guiding a chisel with patient precision. Eli spotted her first. "You came?" he said, bouncing down from the bench. His mismatched rain boots slapped the concrete as he ran to her. "I was curious," she admitted. He held out a sheet of paper. The crayon lines showed 3 figures at a cafe table, but the candle on the cupcake was drawn as a rocket ship firework sparks trailing behind it. "I love it," she said, studying the crooked rocket. "That's a much better candle." Ryan straightened, wiping his palms on a rag. "Didn't expect you on a Saturday." "I wanted to see where corners remember how to be brave," she replied, the corners of her own mouth daring a smile. "Come on, then." He waved her deeper inside. The workshop was its own small country. Workbenches crowded with chisels, clamps, jars of screws like constellations. Stacks of lumber leaned in quiet rows, each marked with chalk notes only he seemed to understand. He stopped beside a rich reddish slab. "Cherry." "Stubborn, but it warms if you earn its trust." She ran her fingers along the grain. "Like people." His eyes flickered toward her. "Exactly like people." At the back, an unfinished rocking chair waited, its maple frame smooth under her palm. "Maple," he said. "Patient. Doesn't mind waiting to be what it's meant to be." "It's steady," she murmured. "Steady's underrated," Ryan said. "Everybody wants spectacular until spectacular lets them down." She looked up at him. "And you, I want honest." He shrugged. "Honest lasts longer." They stood there for a moment, the hum of the overhead lights filling in what didn't need to be said. Eli clattered over with a small scrap of wood. "Dad says we can make this into a shelf for your books." "My books? He says you probably read a lot." Grace laughed softly. "That's thoughtful." "It's engineering," Eli corrected. Ryan watched him with quiet pride. "You'd be surprised how much of life is just making sure the shelves can hold what people give you." She met his gaze, and something unsteady stirred in her chest. Later they sat on upturned crates, Eli hammering away at his project while Grace told them about her first swim meet at 12, how she'd been terrified until her coach said, "Water doesn't judge the shape of you. It only mirrors how you move." "So you and the water were friends?" Eli asked. "We were," she said softly. "We still are. Maybe we just don't visit as often." Ryan's glance was quick but sharp, as if he caught the weight of the admission. "Friends wait," he said simply. When she left that afternoon, the air outside was golden with late sun. Ryan walked her to the door. "Maple takes a long time to reach its full strength," he said. "People rush it, but they just end up with something that breaks too soon." She tilted her head, still talking about wood. His smile was small, a little wry. "Maybe not." Eli waved from inside. "See you Tuesday or Monday? Or both?" Grace rolled toward the corner, not realizing she was still smiling, the real one. Behind her, in a shop that smelled like cedar and possibility, Ryan watched her go and thought about roads some you build, some you clear, and some you just wait beside until someone's ready to travel them. Tuesday arrived with crisp autumn air, the kind that carried the faint bite of wood smoke. Grace found herself wheeling faster toward Harbor Light Cafe, telling herself it was just for coffee. Inside, Eli was perched at the counter, swinging his legs as Marla set down a plate of muffins. Ryan sat beside him, flipping through a dog-eared sketch pad. "You're early," Eli said with mock suspicion. "I'm on important business," she replied. "What kind?" he asked. "The kind that involves muffins." Ryan looked up, that same steady warmth in his eyes. "Glad you came." They settled into their Tuesday tradition. Eli told his story first, how his mom once painted a mural on his bedroom wall because white walls make dreams too small. Ryan shared one about his grandfather, a man who could fix anything except his own stubborn heart. When it was Grace's turn, she hesitated. The cafe was quiet, the hum of conversation a soft backdrop. "When I was little, my father used to tell me I could be anything," she began, but he always added, "as long as it's practical." She smiled faintly. "I think he thought dreams should come with a blueprint." "Mine don't," Eli said firmly. "That's because yours are good ones," Ryan said, ruffling his son's hair. The door swung open, and in walked the man from the other weak-tailored coat, impatient eyes. He spotted Grace this time, his brows lifting in something that wasn't quite surprise. "Grace," he said, voice cool. "Jonathan," she replied, matching his tone. He glanced at Ryan and Eli, his gaze flicking over them like they were furniture. "We need to talk," he said. "Not today," she answered, her voice steady. Jonathan's mouth tightened. "You can't keep avoiding." "I can, actually." Her fingers curled lightly around her coffee mug. Ryan's hand rested on the counter, not touching hers, but close enough to be a presence. Jonathan exhaled sharply as though she'd wasted his time and turned to leave. The door chimed behind him. Eli watched him go. "He's not nice?" he declared. Grace's lips curved. "No, he isn't." Marla came by with a fresh pot pouring without asking. "Storms don't always bring rain," she said quietly. Later, as they stepped outside together, Ryan asked, "Old friend." "Old something," she said, shaking her head. "Some bridges don't need repairing." Eli skipped ahead, splashing through a shallow puddle. "Dad says if you don't want to cross it again, you burn it twice." Ryan chuckled. "Not exactly what I said." "But close," Eli insisted. They reached the corner where they usually parted ways. For a moment, neither moved. Grace could feel the air between them, not heavy, but charged like the stillness before a storm that might be good for growing things. "See you Saturday?" Ryan asked, casual but not careless. She hesitated, then nodded. Saturday. When she rolled away, the scent of wood smoke and coffee lingered, and so did the thought that maybe some corners weren't meant to stay broken. Saturday came with a pale morning sun, and streets still damp from an overnight drizzle. Grace told herself she was only stopping by the workshop because Eli had promised to show her his engineering project. The roll-up door was open again, warm light spilling over the sidewalk. Inside, Ryan was sanding the edge of a cabinet door, and Eli was crouched on the floor building a precarious tower from scraps of pine. "You made it?" Eli scrambled up and waved her in. "We're in the middle of a breakthrough." Ryan glanced up. "Structural integrity's still pending," he said dryly, nodding toward Eli's leaning tower. Grace wheeled closer, eyeing the wobbling stack. "Looks daring." "It's supposed to be," Eli said proudly. "Dad says brave things aren't always balanced." Ryan gave her a half-smile. "He's been listening." They spent the next hour in easy rhythm. Ryan showed her how to read the grain in a piece of walnut, how the lines told you which way the wood wanted to be shaped. Eli insisted she take a turn with the sanding block, and though the fine dust clung to her sleeves, she didn't mind. At one point, Ryan asked her to hold a board steady while he adjusted a clamp. His hand brushed hers, not lingering, but enough to leave a trace of warmth. "Perfect," he murmured. When Eli disappeared to fetch more nails, Grace glanced toward the back corner of the shop. A framed photo hung there. Ryan younger, with a woman whose smile was wide and unguarded, cradling a baby swaddled in a blanket patterned with tiny whales. "She loved the water, too," Ryan said quietly, following her gaze. "We used to take the ferry just to feel the wind." Grace nodded, understanding the kind of absence that fills a room. "I'm sorry." He looked at her, then not with pity, but with the sort of acknowledgement that feels like trust. "We manage," he said simply. Eli returned proudly, holding a jar of mismatched screws. "These are for emergencies," he announced. Grace smiled. "And what counts as an emergency?" "When something worth keeping starts to fall apart," Ryan answered, his eyes never leaving hers. They built a small shelf together that afternoon, Eli handing over tools like a surgeon's assistant. When it was done, Ryan brushed the last of the sawdust away and held it out. "For your books," he said. She ran her fingers along the smooth edge. "It's beautiful." "It's honest," he corrected softly. By the time she left, the sun was sinking low, catching in the sawdust motes that floated in the workshop air. Eli called after her. "See you Tuesday," as though it were already settled. Ryan walked her to the door, leaning lightly against the frame. "Maple's patient," he said again, almost to himself. Grace met his gaze. maybe people can be too. She rolled down the street, the little shelf balanced across her lap. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like it carried more than wood. Behind her, Ryan stood watching until she turned the corner, as if letting her go too soon might undo whatever had begun to take root between them. Tuesday dawned sharp and bright, the kind of day where the air feels washed clean. Grace arrived at Harbor Light Cafe to find Ryan and Eli already in their usual spot, a plate of half-eaten blueberry pancakes between them. Eli spotted her instantly. "You're late," he teased. "I'm right on time," she countered, sliding into place. "You just started early." Marla set down her coffee with a wink. "We've got cinnamon rolls today, fresh out of the oven." Eli leaned forward conspiratorially. "Dad says cinnamon rolls make people tell the truth." Grace arched a brow. "That so?" Ryan shrugged with a half-smile. "I might have said something like that." They shared their Tuesday stories. Eli went first, describing in vivid detail how his science teacher had spilled a whole box of marbles in class. Ryan's story was about fixing a neighbor's fence that had been leaning for years, and how the neighbor had finally admitted he'd been too proud to ask for help. When it was Grace's turn, she hesitated. "I once threw a birthday party," she said finally. "I invited 50 people. Only 2 showed up. Both left before the cake." Eli's mouth dropped open. "That's really mean." Ryan's gaze was steady, the warmth there touched with something protective. "People who don't show up tell you more than people who do." Before she could reply, the door swung open. Jonathan stepped inside again, same tailored coat, same assessing eyes. This time he walked straight to their table. "Grace," he said evenly, "we need to talk, now." Ryan's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, a quiet readiness in the set of his shoulders. Grace kept her voice calm. "I'm in the middle of something." Jonathan glanced at Ryan. "And I can see exactly what." The cafe seemed to hold its breath. Marla stood still behind the counter, her hands resting on a tray. "You've got 5 minutes," Jonathan pressed. "Or the deal falls through." Grace's jaw tightened. "Then it falls through." Eli blinked, looking between them. "He's not nice," he whispered to Ryan. Jonathan's lips curved in a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, then turned on his heel and left. The door closed with a final chime. Grace let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You okay?" Ryan asked. "Yeah," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "I'm fine." Eli slid his plate toward her. "You can have the last pancake. That makes everything better." And somehow, in that moment, it almost did. They lingered longer than usual, the sun shifting across the floor. When it was time to leave, Ryan walked her to the corner. "You don't have to explain," he said. "But if you want to, I'm here." Grace met his eyes. "I know." She rolled away, the smell of cinnamon and coffee trailing after her, along with the unsettling realization that she'd rather be at this table with these two than anywhere else. The next Saturday, Harbor Light's bell jingled as Grace pushed the door open. She'd meant to arrive early, but a stubborn elevator in her building had slowed her down. Ryan was already there, leaning against the counter, talking quietly with Marla. Eli spotted her first and barreled over, nearly tripping on his own shoelaces. "You made it," he grinned. "We were going to send a search party. Glad I saved you the trouble," she said, smiling. Marla slid a paper cup across the counter toward her. "Your usual. On the house today." "Why?" Grace asked. Marla's eyes softened. "Because it's nice to see you walking in here like you belong." Ryan tilted his head toward their table. "Eli's got something to show you." On the table sat a small box. its lid covered in painted stars. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, was a bracelet woven from thin strips of cherry wood polished to a warm glow. Eli was practically vibrating. "We made it for you." "Well, Dad did the hard part. I did the painting." Grace lifted it carefully. "It's beautiful," she murmured, sliding it over her wrist. "Fits perfectly." "That's because we measured when you weren't looking," Eli confessed. Ryan chuckled. "Some surprises take a little planning." They were halfway through coffee when the cafe door opened again, and this time it wasn't Jonathan. It was a tall woman in a slate-gray coat, her hair swept into a flawless chignon. She scanned the room until her eyes landed on Grace. The temperature in the room seemed to drop a degree. Mother Grace said quietly. The woman approached, her heels clicking on the worn wood floor. "Grace, we need to talk. In private." Ryan's hand stilled on his coffee cup. Eli's gaze flicked between them, sensing the shift. Grace kept her voice level. "If you have something to say, you can say it here." Her mother's eyes narrowed briefly before flicking toward Ryan and Eli. "This isn't the company you should be keeping." "That's not your decision," Grace replied, her tone firm but not loud. Ryan stayed silent, but there was a stillness about him, the kind that feels like a shield. Her mother glanced at the bracelet on Grace's wrist, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You're making choices that will have consequences." Grace's jaw tightened. "I'm aware." Without another word, her mother turned and walked out, leaving the faint scent of expensive perfume in her wake. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Eli leaned in and whispered, "She's even scarier than the other guy." Grace laughed softly, tension easing just enough. "You're not wrong." Ryan's voice was low, steady. "You handled that well." She looked at him, and the warmth in his gaze felt like something solid she could hold on to. By the time she left, the bracelet's smooth edges were warm against her skin, a small anchor in a world that seemed intent on unmooring her. The days after her mother's visit stretched long and unsettled. Grace found herself replaying that moment in the cafe, the weight in her mother's voice, the way Ryan had stayed silent but present, as if his stillness alone could steady her. Tuesday arrived with a steady drizzle, the kind that blurred streetlights into soft halos. Grace wheeled into Harbor Light, shaking the damp from her sleeves. Ryan and Eli were already at their table, a deck of well-worn playing cards between them. Eli grinned. "We're playing Go Fish. You're just in time to lose." Grace smirked. "We'll see about that." They played 3 rounds, and she won 2. Eli accused her of mind-reading, Ryan called it good strategy, and Grace just laughed, the kind of laugh she realized she hadn't heard from herself in months. When the cards were gathered up, Ryan leaned back, studying her. "You've been quiet since Saturday." "Just thinking," she said, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. About bridges," she replied slowly. "And whether some should be crossed or burned or just left alone." He didn't push. "Sometimes leaving them alone is the bravest thing." Eli piped up. "Dad says if a bridge is dangerous, you don't cross it. You build your own." Grace smiled. "Your dad's pretty wise." "Pretty," Ryan echoed with a small grin. They were gathering their things to leave when the cafe door opened, and this time it was neither Jonathan nor her mother. A man in a weathered jacket stepped in, shaking rain from his hair. He glanced around, spotted Ryan, and made a beeline for their table. "Hey," the man said, clapping Ryan on the shoulder. "Long time," Mark Ryan replied cautiously. Mark's eyes slid to Grace, curious but not unkind. "Didn't mean to interrupt. Just wanted to say thanks. Heard you fixed up that bench outside my shop. Needed doing, Ryan said simply. Mark smiled, gave a nod to Grace and Eli, and left as quickly as he'd come. As the door swung shut, Grace tilted her head. "Friend of yours," old neighbor Ryan said. "One of the good ones." They stepped out into the drizzle together. The rain was light, almost pleasant. Ryan walked beside her until they reached the corner. "Saturday," he said, more statement than question. "Saturday," she confirmed. He gave her a nod, and she rolled away the sound of the rain, mingling with the quiet thought. She couldn't shake that maybe these Tuesdays and Saturdays, this easy orbit they'd fallen into, was already becoming something worth protecting. Saturday arrived under a sky the color of worn denim, streaked with pale sunlight. Grace told herself she was just stopping by the workshop for coffee. Ryan had mentioned he'd have a fresh pot on, but the truth was she'd been counting the days. The roll-up door was open, the smell of cedar and fresh brew mingling in the cool air. Eli was perched on a stool drawing a rocket ship on a scrap of plywood. Ryan stood at the workbench, sleeves rolled, hands deep in a tangle of wood shavings. "You're right on time," he said with that quiet half-smile of his. "For coffee?" she teased, wheeling in. "Sure," he said, sliding a mug toward her. Eli hopped down, grabbing a little box from under the bench. "We made something else, too." Inside was a small carved bird, its wings spread as if caught mid-flight, the grain of the wood flowing like feathers. "It's a wren," Eli said proudly. "Dad says they're small but brave." Grace turned it in her hands. "It's beautiful." Ryan leaned on the bench. "Thought it might keep you company." They spent the next hour sanding, talking, and laughing, the kind of easy rhythm that felt both new and old. But midway through, the shop's door swung open. Jonathan stood there, rainwater beading on his shoulders, a folder clutched in his hand. His eyes landed on Grace, then flicked to Ryan, his expression cooling. "We need to talk." "Now," he said, voice clipped. Grace set the wren down carefully. "Jonathan, I told you. This isn't about you. It's about the hospital foundation. They're pulling out unless you—" He glanced around, clearly aware of his audience. "Unless you present a united front." Ryan's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Grace's voice was calm but firm. "Then maybe they should pull out." Jonathan's brow furrowed. "You can't be serious." "I am," she said. "I'm done bending to keep other people comfortable." For a moment Jonathan just stared, then shook his head. "You've changed." She met his gaze evenly. "I hope so." He left without another word, the door swinging shut behind him. Eli's small voice broke the silence. "I think the wren's braver than him." Grace laughed softly, tension draining away. "Me too." Ryan handed her the mug she'd set down. "Still warm," he said quietly, as if that was reason enough to stay a little longer. And she did. By the next Tuesday, the air had taken on that early spring softness, where the wind carried both chill and promise. Grace wheeled into Harbor Light Cafe to find Ryan and Eli already at their table, a plate of cinnamon rolls between them. "Saved you one," Eli said, sliding the plate toward her. Grace smiled. "Guess I'm lucky." "You're more than lucky," Ryan murmured, eyes catching hers before he took a sip of coffee. They traded small stories. Eli's school art project that went sideways when a jar of glitter exploded Ryan's repair job at the old boathouse. Grace's admission that she'd started reading again in the quiet hours after midnight. But the moment felt different, warmer somehow, closer. Halfway through, the bell above the door chimed. Grace's mother stepped in her slate-gray coat, immaculate, her expression unreadable. This time she didn't hesitate. She walked straight to their table. "Grace," she began, voice measured. "I came to apologize." Grace blinked, caught off guard. "For what?" "For assuming that the only people worth your time were the ones I approved of," her mother said. "I was wrong." Her gaze shifted briefly to Ryan, then to Eli before returning to Grace. "I see now that you've found better company." Eli grinned at that. Though Ryan stayed still, his expression guarded. Grace took a slow breath. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Her mother nodded once. "I won't interfere again." She reached out briefly, touching Grace's hand, then turned and left, the cafe bell chiming softly in her wake. For a long moment, the three of them sat in silence. Then Eli leaned forward. "That was kind of amazing." Ryan's voice was low. "It's not every day people change their minds." Grace smiled faintly. "Maybe Wrens aren't the only ones who can be brave." They finished their coffee, but the air between them felt lighter, as if some unspoken barrier had lifted. Outside, the sunlight had grown stronger, spilling across the sidewalks. When they left, Ryan walked beside her, as always, his hand brushing the back of her chair now and then, not guiding, just there. At the corner, they paused. "Saturday?" he asked. She nodded. "Saturday." He smiled, and for a moment it felt less like a question and more like a promise. Saturday bloomed with sunlight, the kind that turned the bay into a sheet of rippled silver. Grace made her way to the workshop, the carved wren tucked in her lap. She wasn't entirely sure why she'd brought it, except that it felt right to have it with her. The roll-up door was open again. Eli sprawled on the floor with colored pencils, sketching something that looked suspiciously like a cafe. Ryan was at the workbench, sanding a smooth curve into what might become the leg of a chair. "You're here," he said, glancing up. "I told you I would be," Grace replied, wheeling in. Eli bounded over. "Guess what Dad's making something for you?" Ryan shot him a look, but there was no heat in it. "Supposed to be a surprise." She raised a brow. "Now I'm curious." He hesitated, then stepped aside. On the bench sat a wooden frame, its joints clean and precise, its seat wide enough for her chair to roll under comfortably. "A table," he said simply. "Thought you could use one that actually fits." Her throat tightened. "Ryan, this is beautiful." "Not finished yet," he murmured, brushing sawdust from the edge. "But I will." They spent the morning in easy conversation, Eli darting between them, offering expert advice on sanding and stain colors. The light through the open door caught on dust motes, turning them to gold. At one point, Grace glanced toward the wren on the bench. Small but brave, she murmured. Ryan's gaze followed hers. "Yeah, sounds familiar." Just after noon, Marla from Harbor Light appeared in the doorway holding a basket. "Thought you three could use lunch," she said. They sat together on the workshop floor, sandwiches, coffee, and the quiet sound of the bay beyond. Grace realized as Ryan laughed at something Eli said that the edges of her life had softened. The sharp loneliness that used to define her days had been replaced with something warmer, steadier. When it was time to leave, she paused in the doorway. "Ryan, yeah, I'm glad you asked if you could join us that day." His smile was slow, certain. "Me too." Eli waved from inside. "Tuesday," he called. Grace wheeled into the sunlight, the wren safe in her lap, the promise of more Tuesdays and more Saturdays carrying her forward. "Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories." And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.